Okay, so here in Palestine we have what is called administrative detention. Now, administrative detention is basically a colonial tool of oppression that has been used throughout the world and in fact continues to be used throughout the world. It's probably more famous in Palestine because Israel's systematic abuse of it. Administrative detention is a procedure which enables Israel to arrest, interrogate, and detain a Palestinian based on completely secret evidence, and and imprison them for periods of 1 to 6 months. Now, these periods of 6 months can be renewed indefinitely. So we've had situations where Palestinians have been in administrative detention for up to periods of 10 years. Now, this is a form of torture, psychological torture, and here at Azimir we really focus on administrative detention a lot, just because it's so brutal. I mean, and it's so unjust, and I mean we've had many cases where the detainees themselves have been, for example, when they have been finished their 6 month administrative detention order, as they are literally leaving the prison with their bags packed, ready to go home, they're handed another administrative detention at the gates of the prison, and they have to turn around and go back to their cells. The psychological impact, not only for the detainee but their families themselves, is simply immeasurable. And as I said, it's a colonial tool of oppression. The only thing with administrative detention, I mean, you see, Israel is very smart. I mean, Israel will pick and choose different laws and regulations depending, or to suit its own, political and strategic needs. For example, Israel uses laws back from the Ottoman Empire. It uses laws from the British Mandate, from the Jordanian or from the Egyptian administration of Gaza. Its own laws, legal laws, etc., and it creates a kind of a maze of bureaucracy. And this is a way of Israel trying to legalize its occupation and legalize its colonial activities. And administrative detention is one way of doing this. Israel administrative detention is legal under international law, but it's only to be used in exceptional circumstances. Now, over the years, Israel has administratively detained thousands and thousands of Palestinians. I mean, at the moment we have 178 administrative detainees being held by Israel, which historically is very, very low. I mean, the whole idea that Israel uses administrative detention in exceptional circumstances is just making a mockery of international law. But again, it's one way of Israel trying to justify the imprisonment and the suppression of any any real or perceived Palestinian resistance to its occupation and colonial activities. So that's administrative detention. Let me talk about the process of arrests, from the moment of arrest through to interrogation, through to sentencing, etc. Okay, so basically, if we're talking about the West Bank is governed by military law, and we have about 1,650 military orders that govern every aspect of Palestinian civil life. A Palestinian can be arrested basically anywhere. I mean, they could be arrested off the street, at a checkpoint, at a border crossing. But what we're seeing more and more is that the Israelis are arresting people during the night. Now, obviously, the Israelis have a reason for everything, and arresting people during the night obviously disorientates people. So what normally happens is the Israelis will go in the middle of the night, they'll kick down the door, they will separate the family, they will ransack the house or the apartments, destroy personal belongings, in many cases use physical violence against the people. If they find the person they're looking for, from that very moment is when the process of humiliation and physical abuse starts. Normally they'll be blindfolded and handcuffed. They'll be brought out and they'll be thrown in. And in many cases they won't have time to dress, so they'll be brought out in a vest or pajamas or whatever. They'll be brought out and they'll be put in the back of a military jeep. where they're beaten by the soldiers, and in many cases their heads are put down beside the sound system. So the Israelis will blare the music with the person's head right beside their ear, right beside the sound system. Again, another way and another strategy of that Israel uses to disorientate people, etc., etc. Now this doesn't happen only with happen with adults. This happen with regularly with children, and children as young as 12 years of age, and even younger than 12 years of age. So basically, this is the moment of arrest. Okay, so what happens? What happens after this? Okay, a number of things can happen. They can be brought to a detention centre. They can be brought to an interrogation centre. They can be brought to prison. They could be released, etc., etc. So there are a number of different options. In many cases, the interrogation centres and detention centres are located inside settlements. I meant to mention that the Israelis aren't obliged to tell the person, number one, why they're being arrested, and number two, where they're being brought. So in many cases, family members are taken away, and their family has absolutely no idea where they've been taken. So within a period of 4 days, they have to be brought before a judge. This was up until I think September of 2011. This was a period of 8 days, but now it's they must be brought before a judge for 8 days, and before the judge, again, a number of things can happen. They can have their period of interrogation extended, which is very, very common. They can have charges brought against them, which happens sometimes. They can be imprisoned as an administrative detainee, which we mentioned earlier on, or they could be released. Okay, so this is what has to happen within 4 days. Then, if we look at someone that's been interrogated, so a Palestinian here in the West Bank can be interrogated for a period of 90 days, 3 months, and be denied access to a lawyer for 60 days, 2 months. Now, obviously, given Israel's history of systematic abuse, of torture and ill treatment of Palestinian political prisoners, this leaves open a huge scope of abuse, and the abuse happens on a daily basis. So as I said, they can be denied a lawyer for 60 days. Now during this 60 days, the prisoners, whether you're talking about children or adults, it makes no difference. The ill treatment and torture of the Palestinian political prisoners and detainees is systematic. Let me be clear. I mean, there's you won't find anybody that hasn't gone through an interrogation session where they haven't been physically or psychologically abused, ill-treated, or tortured. I'll just give you a recent example of someone here in Adamir. I think he's behind me here. Ayman Nasser. Ayman Nasser is a researcher with Adamir, and on the 15th of October 2012, like many others, the Israelis came in and kicked down his door, ransacked his house, separated his family, and brought Ayman away, just like we described earlier on. Now, Ayman proceeded to have 45 days of interrogation. During these 45 days interrogation, the interrogation periods lasted up and over 20 hours per day. During this time, Ayman was tied behind his back constantly, even though Ayman suffers from some medical problems already, and was deprived of, was coerced into making confessions, etc., etc. When Ayman wasn't in interrogation, he was is held in isolation, in a cell by 2 meters by 2 meters. Now, in this cell, there was no natural sunlight. There was only one fluorescent light. There was one blanket, and there was an air conditioner. But the air conditioner was on cold constantly. again, another form of torture. And this is just one example of the thousands upon thousands of examples that we can use, and in many cases are far, far worse. I'm only using this example because I'm in here is working here with Adzamir. I mean, we've had cases where children have been tortured. Children have been, from held tied up from one arm to a corner to a room, one arm to another corner of a room, and their legs the same to the corner, but off the ground, and they've been left like this for a couple of days to make people confess. So these are the ideas. I mean, Israel is the master of torture. I mean, we let's be honest. I mean, even the days of the physical abuse, etc. Those days are, it doesn't happen as much for a couple of different reasons that I'll explain. In 1999, the Israeli Supreme Court outlawed the use of torture by Israel, except, and you'll usually find an exception or an if or a might or a but when it comes to the Israelis. And the exception this time is that Israel still is allowed to use torture when there's ticking bomb cases involved. Now, a ticking bomb case means that if the Israelis feel that if they don't get information from this person, there's going to be an attack, and they must stop the attack. This is their justification. However, this ticking bomb justification enables Israel to continue with its torture and ill treatment of Palestinian prisoners, so much that it's still considered systematic. And why I say that Israel are the masters of torture, I mean, they use the different positions and stuff like that. The banana position, where a detainee or prisoner will be interrogated and they'll be put back and sitting on their chair, and their back will bend over like this. They call it the banana position. Or they will have another. They will have a really, really small chair, like a child's chair. But it sounds like nothing. You can sit in a child's chair, but if you sit in this child's chair for a long period of time, which you've done, I mean, this you will really, really feel the pain. But they've also developed their torture in terms of more of the psychological torture, etc. And then so this is the interrogation periods that can happen, or that does happen. So then after interrogation, what happens? As we said, they will go be. They could become an administrative detainee. They could be released, charges, blah blah blah. If there's charges brought against them, and I forgot to mention about the confession. In many cases, all this torture happens for a reason. I mean, and what is the reason? They want to make the Palestinians confess, and in many cases they confess absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with it. But it doesn't matter for Israel, because once they have a confession, it's the whole idea is to suppress Palestinian resistance and any resistance to the occupation. And as I said at the beginning, this is very, very effective. So when they go to the Israeli military courts. As I said, in the West Bank there was Israeli military law. We have two Israeli military courts operating in the West Bank. We have one in Ofer, which is just outside Ramallah, and in Ofer you'll have the military courts, you have an actual prison, and you have a army base. So it's a big complex. And then in the north of the West Bank, north of Jenin, you'll have Salem military courts. Again, it's another military court. Now, in these military courts, again, if we're speaking to people from the West, I mean, most people have an idea in their heads of a court and a judge and prosecution and defense, and everything's very formal and very kind of traditional. This again is not the case in Palestine. To describe them first physically, the Israeli military courts, you have about 5 or 6 temporary structures, porto cabins, and in these porto cabins you will have the judge, the military judge, who is appointed by the military commander in the West Bank. You will have the prosecution, who is appointed by the Israeli military commander in the West Bank. You will have the translator, who is appointed by the Israeli military commander in the West Bank. You will have the administrative people, blah blah blah. Everybody in the Israeli military court system is appointed by Israel themselves. By definition, and military courts can't be impartial. And in fact, evidence shows that it's clearly not impartial. Why? Because over 99% of the cases that go to trial, 99% of them, over 99%, results in conviction. Let me be clear. There is absolutely no justice in Israeli military courts. And we have to ask ourselves, why is there such a high rate? Why is there such a high conviction rate? And one of the reasons, one of the main reasons why, a lot of these convictions are a result of plea bargains. And let me explain what I mean. Basically, everybody knows there's no justice in Israeli military courts. So therefore, if you go before a military courts, you have a 99% chance of going to prison. But if you sign a plea bargain with, say I'm a child and I'm accused of throwing stones, the maximum sentence by the way of throwing a stone is 20 years in prison for a child. If I'm accused of throwing a stone, and I didn't do it, I had absolutely nothing to do it, but if I'm accused and I would have been ill-treated or coerced into sign a confession in Hebrew, which is a language I probably don't understand, the most Palestinians don't understand, I could sign this confession and I could go to jail for a few months or a year or two, something like this. If I challenge the charges against me and say, no, I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't throw any stones, I wasn't involved in anything you're accusing me, and I go to trial. Number one, I know that I will be convicted. There's a 99% chance convicted. But number two, I know that the sentence that I'm